started talking yet. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Applied Hermetics with Rufus Opus. I am Rufus Opus, and today we've got it's me and Sara Mastros. We are going to be, let's see here, we're going to be talking about various different things. Let's see, and there we go. Okay, cool. So the background, Sara can't see the background, but it looks like we're speaking from the very depths of hell today, but we are not actually doing that. So, but yeah, we'll go ahead and jump on in. Sara, thank you so much for joining me. We are going to be talking about. I thought we'd start with talismans, Solomonic talismans. You've got a class coming up on that, and a book and series of whatnots and whatnots. So do you want to just jump in with that? Wow. That's a hectic title. Hang on just a second. It occurs to me that you might not be on there with the sound. Hang on just a second. Audio output capture. Okay. All right. So there we go. Hopefully everybody can hear Sara here. Jury is saying they can't hear. Okay, let me see now. If somebody's out in the chat world, if you can go ahead, Sara, if you can go ahead and say something. All right. Okay, hopefully now, Sara, if somebody can type into their text that they are seeing it, would be great. Okay. All right, let's carry on with that. I believe that fixed that. Okay. Okay. Oh, they're still not hearing you, Sara. Hang on just a second. I'm sorry. Oh no. This is okay. Sorry guys, we're trying to get Sara's audio on here. I don't know why this isn't working. Okay. All right, Sara, can you try saying something, please? It's still not showing up here on my mixer. I can hear you just fine, of course. Let me see. Audio output is going to. Oh, maybe if I put you on the speakers. Now why don't you try saying something?
So now can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
And everybody else can hear me too?
I think everybody else can hear you too.
Excellent. All right.
Yes,
So,
I can hear you. I can hear you in the next room. All right, woohoo! Sorry about that. Oh my gosh. Okay, so and that is entirely because I'm a moron. But yes, it is not your fault. Okay, sorry about that, Sara. So let's go ahead and start over again. Sara Mastros is joining me. We're going to talk about Solomonic Pentacles and the Pentacles of Mather's Key of Solomon. So there we go.
So just to summarize what I said a couple coming up. It'll start next month in June. This will be the second iteration of it, so we've sort of gotten the bugs out on the first group, the guinea pigs, on the 44 Pentacles from Mather's Key of Solomon. And I also have a book coming out on that material, which will be out in January. If you just Google my name and Solomon book, it'll come right up to pre-order if you want. But something else that I have going on is while I was doing the research for that book, you know, the Pentacles are not originally part of the Key of Solomon. Like, there are a couple of ways to tell the language in them is a little bit different, but in particular, like, there are two books in the Key of Solomon, book 1 and book 2, and the Pentacles are not in either of those books, right? They're just sort of shoved in between, which is an indication that, like, they were added in from the different source at some later time, right? So most of the Key of Solomon as we know it is probably, I'm going to be really like rough with dates in this. If anybody is really interested, like if you email me, I can sort of fact up these dates with more specific citations, but I don't want to get too bogged down in this in just like a conversation. But broadly, the Key of Solomon was probably written by and for Christians, probably in like the 13 or 1400s, probably in Italy, and probably originally in Latin. But the Pentacles appear to have been written by and for a Jewish audience in Hebrew, I believe earlier, and probably in Al-Andalus, in Muslim-controlled Iberia, among that Sephardic community there.
So you went through and you've gone through and reconstructed the original Hebrew off of, or I mean, not the original Hebrew, but you've gone through and reconstructed the Hebrew for the talismans in your latest works, right?
Reconstructed is a complicated word. Like, I've done my very best to translate them. Just like many other things in sort of a Hebrew amulet tradition. A lot of times, they're written in cipher or otherwise sort of encrypted, so it's not always possible to reconstruct. But for the Mather's Pentacles, almost all of them, like with careful attention to detail, right, and some like linguistic analysis, you can read them. Like, they have names on them and words on them, and you can read them. So I've translated them. Some of my translations, as I said, because they're in cipher or because there's transcription errors. In the Mathers, it's unclear where Mathers got his Pentacles from. I have some theories, which I'll talk about later if you want. But like, they appear to have been sort of handed down through a series of people, most of whom were not fluent Hebrew speakers. So there's a lot of like errors and problems in the transcription, right? And if you look at the older manuscripts, that is also the case, right? Like, it's unclear exactly where these came from, although, side note, again, I will talk about this in a second, I believe that I believe I do know where Mathers got them, right? And I'll talk about that in a second. But in the course and in the book, I'm translating out what's on the Pentacles, because, in any kind of Hebrew amulet tradition, of which these Pentacles are like very representative, they're quite similar to all like other kinds of very mainstream Jewish like written amulet magic. Like, the words and the intention behind those words is the key component of the magic. So I think like it's really important to understand what those names mean when you work with these Pentacles. And that's the bulk of the book and the course, but then as a frame around that, I do present like a full system for how to work with these Pentacles. Many of them are very traditional Hebrew god names. Some of them are traditional angel names. And then some of them are things that are like, we generally interpret as the name of an angel, but they're less anthropomorphic. Like, an angel is a name. Like, the name itself is a being, a spirit. And so a lot of these names, like, they're not angels in the same way we would think of, like, say, Archangel Raphael as like a well-constructed, sort of very anthropomorphic, very like easy to communicate human-like being that you can have a conversation with, right? They're angels in a more like mechanistic context, right? And that is built on their name. So Raphael's name means the healer of El, or the healing god, right? And so in some of the names are less anthropomorphically angels. Generally, we interpret them as angels, and there's also quotes from Torah and sometimes other like sentences or phrases on them, but primarily they're Hebrew god names and angel names.
Okay, that's cool. I don't really understand them that way, but the
How do
so
you understand them?
I'm not saying I understand them properly at all. The way I understand them is probably just I mean the way I do it is more like I make an approximation of the Mather's talismans as best I can in the metal in the right hour and the right day, and say the prayers, and I ask for the spirits of the one for each of the planets, the one that has the four angels on the back of it. So like I put that. Yeah, I put that one on the back of them, and I trust that they're going to make the emblem on the other side that represents what the intent is. I trust that they'll make it happen. So that's just sort of my approach to it, but I don't think it's like
Right, and so
traditional
I don't think
or.
there's anything wrong with that approach, and I encourage that approach, but I think that, like, there's this addition that, like, when you construct them that way, right, they're really, at least as I understand it, right, they're really functioning as sort of a house for a spirit, which is a very traditional kind of a talisman.
Right,
Like,
right,
the
and
talisman itself is housing a spirit or a collection of spirits or a power.
right, but
Right?
the way you described it is more like the names are functional, almost like the words themselves are building reality with the talismanic properties.
Absolutely. And so what I'm saying is I actually do both of those things.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Cool.
So, like, there's nothing wrong with the way you're doing it, and I'm not suggesting there is. I would say, however, that, like, what you're constructing is not really a Solomonic talisman. It's a different kind of a talisman, right? It's a planetary spirit talisman that looks like a Solomonic talisman.
Yeah.
Like, you have to actually activate it and be like,
I don't think that any of our Solomonic magic is necessarily accurate. I think most of what we find in the grimoires is an approximation at best of what an actual Hebrew tradition would look like. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't even mean to say, like, authentic. Like, I'm not saying your tradition is, like, less authentic in any way. Like,
Yeah, and I didn't take it that way.
one thing about Solomon, it's that he was, like, not real concerned with keeping things traditionally Jewish, right? Like, he was straight up worshiping foreign gods. Rabbis complain about it all the time.
Yeah, he's like the least Hebrew of the Solomon. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I would argue he is in many ways the most Hebrew, and, like, the nature of, like, Hebrew magic is that it is in fact eclectic, but, right, that at its core, at least of the Pentacles, is this written amulet tradition. And so it's not that, like, any other way is wrong, it's that, like, there's this thing you can put on top of or inside of what you're doing that adds, like, a lot of extra power.
Right. Yeah. I think that is a very a useful approach to it for sure, and I think that like one of the things that I've always admired about your work is how much how layered you can get with things. Like I think it was during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur one year you shared your the ritual that you do as part of the New Year. The ritual, and it was just like the layers that you bring into your rituals and your teachings and the things that you have to bring to the table are just incredible. And it's just like well, I mean it's thorough, and it adds layers that really like I was reading it as like this Protestant Christian evangelical person who's read way too much of the Old Testament growing up, and heard way too many dyed-in-the-wool pastors saying all this stuff. But also, like, I converted to Judaism, so like I but like in your writings, I can see both that passionate, ecstatic thing that I was taught in charismatic Christianity to look for in God. Like I see that in your writings about this Old Testament God, and then on top of it, you've got the academic layers and the training and the rabbinical studies and your notes on your rituals is just like having a conversation with a rabbi. It's like
I assure you, it is not.
Well, I'm not saying I had the best rabbi. It's a lot like talking to my rabbi, but my rabbi he might have left something.
My rabbi either, sadly. If it was, I'd probably go to shul bar.
So anyway, yeah, I think that your approach to the talismans is definitely going to be more informed and more versatile. And I think the more layers that you can bring to your studies is always going to be something more. Uh, it's going to be the more layers you can bring to it, the more powerful and effective your stuff is going to be. And
I
hey,
agree. Like I feel like every new magician I work with, when I like really just try to work from their point of view, whether I agree with them or not, like I've learned so many things that can help inform my own practice. And I think a lot of it for me is like, you know, when I was coming up in magic, like I started doing magic in, I'm gonna say like the early 90s in Amish country when I was a kid. So like I didn't have access to resources. So like when I found a copy of the Keel of Solomon, which in and of itself like took a lot of work and magic for me to get a copy of that book, like I didn't have any guide. I just sort of read it and like took it at face value. I was like, okay, well, this is a magic book. It's going to tell me how to do magic. I'm going to do this magic. It was a little too Christian for my taste. So I just kind of rewrote the invocations with less Jesus and more Judaism, which was quite easy, and sort of took it from there. So I think like in some ways I think my method appears to be informed by deep study, but it's actually like a really naive method. Like I'm just reading the book and doing my best to do what the book wants me to do, but I'm also 12 in an Amish country, so like I'm gonna have to make some changes. I can't get a lion skin. It's like not
well, okay,
a thing that can happen, you know?
but magicians are called to this kind of thing, and we make those kinds of changes to things and adaptations and stuff. So
Yeah, exactly.
like your adaptations that you were making at 12 are the same kind of adaptations you're making now at however much longer it's been. We're
Yeah,
still
exactly. I'm
it,
always personally, it's why I pushed back a little bit on the word reconstruction before. Like personally, I'm not trying to work magic the way I would have worked it if I was a feudal Catholic warlord in the 1600s France, because I'm not. And I'm not trying to write these amulets as if I am like an orthopraxic Sephardic rabbi in 12th century Spain. And I'm not trying to work magic like I live in the Bronze Age, because I don't. Like I'm working magic for me in the place where I live, like in the cultures that I thrive in the 21st century, you know? So like personally I'm really invested in like learning, right? So when magic has words on it, I want to know what those words mean, but I'm not especially interested in like historic reconstruction personally. Like my interest in it is exclusively as like inspiration for modern magic. And just like nerdy shit. I mean, I just like nerd stuff.
well, yeah, and it definitely it all feeds into our practice for sure. Like it's a
Exactly.
complicated thing. So Ronald Stemco asked in the comments, Pentacles are something from Goetia, right? And no, they're not from. I mean, not really. No.
Yeah, that's like such a complicated question. The word pentacle means magical pendant. Like it's just a kind of an amulet. But when we say pentacle, we're usually in magic, we're talking about a specific kind of like written amulet that has some amount of like Euclidean geometry on it, so like pentagrams or other like geometric diagrams, and then it has Hebrew names of power on it. That's usually what we mean by a pentacle.
Right.
And Goetia is both a specific book of Solomonic magic, not the book that these pentacles are normally packaged with, but it is also like a much older tradition of Grecophone, Greek language magic, which like is deeply informed by the cultures of the Greater Levant, of like the Eastern Mediterranean, but particularly like the cultures of like ancient Israel, ancient Greece, and ancient Egypt are so deeply entwined that it's really hard to pick them apart, right? So, like the Greek magical papyri, we call them Greek because they're mostly written in Greek. They're from Egypt, and a substantial number of them are definitely Jewish, right? Or so, for example, the Great Library of Alexandria was primarily run in Greek. It is physically in Egypt, and almost a third of the population of Alexandria was Jewish, and almost certainly nearly half the students and teachers and philosophers at the Great Library were Jewish. Like, they're just deeply entwined traditions. So, like, there is a relation, like, Pentacles, as we know them, certainly grow out of this complex Grecophone, Egyptian, Hellenistic, Jewish magical tradition that we could call glacial.
So the whole approach to having it all came from the same time period with the same people and the same sort of like
And
yeah
I understand it to be like a living tradition that has roots in, like,
in
at the
multiple
end of the day,
streams.
to my mind, if we're going to call something Solomonic magic, like, the core element of it is its relationship to Solomon. Like, it is making some kind of claim about the magic of Solomon magician.
Well, where would you place it historically? If it's Solomonic magic, traditional Solomonic magic.
So I would say, like, because its core element is its relationship to Solomon the Magician King, it starts off in Iron Age Israel, right? And slowly develops through, like, spreading out from there. So it's bringing in Babylonian astro-theological elements. It's bringing in, Grecophone sorcery and Egyptian priestcraft, and all of those things are winding together, winding their way through Europe into, like, a very complex tradition of Solomonic magic in Afro-Caribbean diasporic practice, in modern Anglophone practice. Like, there's this whole complex cultural tree that exists today as a very multicultural thing. But I argue that, like, the essential quality which makes something Solomonic is its relationship to King Solomon, and King Solomon, at least apocryphally, is from Iron Age Israel.
Yeah, I think it's more. To me, I see Solomonic stuff as just another facet of the Greek Roman first through third century. Like I don't think does any of our Solomonic material actually predate the like isn't the earliest like the Testament of Solomon isn't that like fourth century BC?
Well, so again, like, it depends what you constitute as Solomonic, right? Like,
Well, like the
Song of
practices of
Songs is explicitly sorceress.
oh okay so
Like,
but
there's this kind, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, but what I'm saying is,
oh
it
so
doesn't
you
matter. Like, the word Solomonic, whether we choose, like, who knows
right
what we do and don't apply that word to.
so you actually so you're familiar with actual real traditional uh, Mesopotamian Hebrew Judaic like real Canaanite type the old fashioned magic like the real magic of that was like so when
Familiar with it. I
Saul
mean, like, I read the same books you read.
well
Like,
okay but I mean okay but I don't pretend like I know what I'm talking about I don't know what I mean I know that I don't read them with the same kind of rigor that you read. I read about magic. I don't really study it,
well, I mean, yeah. So, when I was coming up in magic, like, one of the things that we were told, right, by the, like, sort of prevailing kind of pop Wicca stuff that I was encountering in the early 90s was that, like, you should lean into, like, the magical traditions of your ancestors. And, like, my dad's family's Greek and my mom's family's Jewish, so that left me with, like, a very rich
yeah,
sort of
you take your
cultural
pick.
wilderness to investigate. And certainly, I would say that, like, that Solomonic magic as we know it today is definitely coming through, like, rising out of that. I agree, sort of late antiquity, Grecophone, Egyptian, Jewish magical conglomeration. But what I'm saying is, like the when we talk about things as Greek, that doesn't exclude them being Jewish. Many of the Greek magical papyri are clearly written by Jews. Like, there's that is a Jewish tradition. That Hellenic magical tradition
Yeah, absolutely.
includes a strong Jewish magical tradition, and that Jewish magical tradition is informed by much older sort of Jewish spiritual and magical books, including
Right.
like the 5 books of Moses.
And that's what I was talking about is like you're familiar with a rich Jewish tradition of magic that a lot of people don't understand is parallel to what you learned about in Kabbalah and the Sefer Yetzirah and the emanationist traditions and in parallel to that there was also
yeah,
the
but also much older than those traditions. Which,
right.
Like, what we think of as Kabbalah is in many ways like a Jewish repackaging of Pythagoreanism.
Yeah, and it's relatively recent too. Like it's
right.
not.
And that's what I mean about these things. Like, these cultures
Right.
Like,
But
they're all always talking to each other. They all always share a common spoken language. Like, the, like they can all talk to each other the whole time. They're all
right, because
native
they're all Middle Eastern,
magic.
right? And they
Like, and
all
they're all, like, literally in covens together.
right. And
And, like,
so
they're
but
buying magical amulets from each other. Because Hebrew magical amulets have writing on them, a lot of times that writing includes the name of both the magician and the client they were made for. And those names give us a lot of, like, information about their culture. So we know for a fact that, like, non-Jewish people were buying Jewish amulets from Jews and vice versa. Like, less often, but we also find Jews buying magic from not Jews, like, throughout history. Like, they're all wound up. And I think trying to silo out those cultures, like, even when it comes from a good place of, like, not wanting to appropriate, like, it gets a little weird and folkish when you try and, like, silo cultures. Like, that's just not how humans behave. You know, like, everybody's doing everything.
yeah, well, I don't know. I think that people, if they actually took your classes in in the talismanic magic of the tradition, they would get a lot out of it for sure, for sure. But
Oh, I mean, I think so too. Like, in particular, I really think it matters what those words are. Like, I think understanding those words really deeply informs a talisman practice. But also, like, there's a whole complicated cultural, like, context, and what we would say in Judaism is kavanah, an intention, like a mystic intention that sort of goes along with those words that deepens a practice.
okay. Yeah, people are still having a hard time hearing it. It looks like. I'm sorry if I'm hoping that they're hearing you better.
Let me try putting on a headset with a mic. Maybe that.
No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I think I've got it turned up to the most it can go now. So it'll probably be. Qigong, if you can hear me, please let me know if that improved the experience there. Anyway, thank you very much for doing all that there. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the witch lessons. So
Sure.
like, okay, yes, Qigong said that it has been improved very much. Okay, good. So they can hear you now. Okay, good. So you don't have to worry about that. So when you started doing all the stuff with your logo. I saw that you presented your logo a couple different ways. What are you trying to work on with this? Like I see you're starting to do more outreach and more of that. What is your intent with all of that with the services that you're rendering?
I would like to raise up an army of witches for this deeply troubled time in which we live.
Right.
That's my intention. I want to empower people because I think we live in a world that needs more magicians in it.
I agree 100%. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on and to share your message and your intentions around the world, because I think it's important that more people are empowered and become more effective at creating their worlds. And I think that you're really good at bringing that message across to people, you know. So
also, from like a personal standpoint, I just genuinely love to teach. You know, I taught math before I taught witchcraft, and I just genuinely love teaching. Like, to me, teaching is a like deeply mystic and sort of initiatory act.
Yeah, I figured really out that I just like to hear myself talk, and it's
same.
So I do that a lot, but you know the whole thing about like trying to get more magicians to do magic, it's you know, getting them off of the couch. I think one of the main reasons that people are able to do that right now is because of people like you and Jason and you know people who are starting to make it more palatable and more effective and more useful, you know, and unpacking the layers of the tradition in greater detail, you know, like you've added layers to the Solomonic Pentacles, you know, by unpacking some of the Hebrew that was like I've always used Joseph Peterson's his version of the Key of Solomon, and it's not exactly the greatest images of the Pentacles, but I mean, they kind of give you a notion of what was sort of intended to be on there, but the actual Hebrew itself is hard to it's hard to make out. I mean,
it is, and like I will freely admit that like I'm sometimes guessing, and I try and always like explain, like, I think this letter is actually supposed to be this letter that looks like this because this thing is not a word, but this thing means army power, and it's on a pentacle for army power, right? I try and always like explain the conclusions I'm drawing about what I think letters should be, but I also think it's a mistake to understand there to be like one authentic, correct version.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of different, like, magic is an art, really, right? And so there's a lot of different good ways to do it.
Yeah, and this is like it's sort of like it's just like your opinion, man. Like this whole like pinnacle of Mars that's supposed to be for armies to get your armies going. It taps into a very specific set of verses, a very specific feeling about God that you have, and the name of God that reflects that relationship and the power of God in the moment for the armies and for your nation and for your entire tribe and for your entire people, and that's reflected in this talisman. But it's not going to be the same thing as it would be for someone else, right? Who actually understands God differently and is more concerned about the compassionate side of God, who wants to protect his children, and this is a mother's son, and this is a talisman for protecting my child at a time of war and bringing him home safely. It's a completely different war talisman, but it's still right. So it's like, ideally magicians learn that, but I think these talismans of the Key of Solomon and the spirits of the Lemegatons Goetia and the grimoire traditions in general they're ways to get your feet wet and see what spirits can do and inform your practice and help you get the little things that you need, a house, a car, and a job to sort of like support your work and your will. But then it's supposed to like turn you into this creative powerhouse, right? Because like once you have the minimum stuff, then you can unpack your true will and who you really are and what you want to do with yourself.
The word grimoire means textbook,
right? And
like I do things exactly the way they're written in the textbook is maybe like not the flex people think it is.
Yeah.
Like a textbook is a way you learn things, but like as a person who's written textbooks for like math, when you write a textbook, you're sort of really highlighting certain features, right? You're kind of exaggerating certain processes in the magical process because as an exercise, right? And that's why they sort of look the way they do, right? But I don't think there's any intention that they be done sort of exactly that way.
Well,
because if there was, why would there be more than one of them?
I think, and you touched on a very key point there about like the people who do it really well. You're like, good job. I bet you did great in school too. It's like, yes, I follow the instructions, teacher. Good for you.
Like, and I mean, I think of it like cooking, right? So like when you're first learning to cook, like I think probably you should hew pretty close to recipes because you don't really know what you're doing.
Right.
But like, the goal, at least in my mind, the goal of learning is that like you develop what in math we would call habits of mind, which I think is a really good way to think about sort of magical intuition as well. It's a habit of mind and like a habit of practice that just sort of lets you be a lot more creative and flexible about what you're making. So you just kind of open your fridge and see what there is and invent a recipe on the fly. But the ability to do that is grounded in like practice with other people's recipes.
So someone asked if anybody follows Barden to the letter. The answer is probably no. Other than psychos, he says no, probably not.
Look, I'm gonna say this, and I fear like this is gonna get taken out of context and we catch some shit for it. But I don't even do things exactly the way I wrote them in my book.
Right? Nobody does.
I wrote a book with and I try and explain that in the book. So the instructions are always like, say something like it's guidelines, and then I have an example
and the usual,
right. I think a lot about the Sermon on the Mount, which, like, I'm not Christian. I don't know the Christian Bible very well, so forgive me if I misunderstand this passage. But the way I understand it, Jesus stands up and he's like, you don't need to do like these really like, in addition to these really complicated ritual prayers, you can just speak directly to God from your heart.
Exactly.
Like, oh, our Father who art in heaven, and then people like word for word exactly say that like a ritual. And I'm like, you missed the point, guys. Like, that is not what we're saying. So in Judaism, we have this tension between ketuvah and kavana, right? Between like ritual purity, right? Like ritual exactitude and mystic intention. And I think for me, it's always about trying to, like, those two things are not in conflict with each other, right? But there is a like dynamic balancing tension between them that I think of as like braiding together. Mm-hmm. And that's like, for my magic, that's kind of where I am, you know? Yeah. So I also translated like the Orphic hymns, these Greek sacred poems. And sometimes people ask me about whether my translations are literal. And I'm like, I think you fundamentally misunderstand the notion of sacred poetry. Like, you can't translate it literally. That's what poetry means. That's what magic means.
I view your poetry the same way I do Patrick Dunn's.
Your
exactly. Translations they're different translations from different magicians looking at different aspects of the powers differently. You know, and I think that you can see it like a reflection of you in your grimoire that you don't see in Patrick Dunn's. You know, it's neat,
yeah.
You know, and it's.
I always think of his as very, like, to really put it, like, very, like, bluntly, like, to drastically oversimplify, I think of his as really, like, delicate and sophisticated and, like, Apollonian and a little more ceremonial, and mine are more, like, drunk bacchanal stomping in the woods.
Yeah.
Kind of magic, and, like, that's just an aesthetic preference. You know what I mean? Like, neither of those is like a correct way to do it, because poetry doesn't have a correct version and magic doesn't have a correct version. Like, there are wrong ways to do it, but there's no singular right way, you know?
I have my opinions about who's doing it wrong, that's for sure, but I don't know if I'm right, but I have my opinions.
Even doing it wrong, I feel like there's wrong in like an incorrect sense, like it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's wrong in like an ethical sense, which I will say, like, I don't want to name names, but like a lot of people are doing it wrong in the sense, like, I think they're terrible people who make the world worse every time they open their mouth. So, like, that seems like the kind of wrong I care about.
I have foot and mouth disease myself, so I have to be careful.
Oh, same.
I have to not. But I mean, you know.
But you seem like your heart's in the right place. Like,
I mean, well,
I wouldn't be afraid to be in a back alley with you. Like, you seem like a stand-up dude.
I probably won't shiv you for your wallet, probably.
Okay, but what I'm saying is there's people in magic that, like, I don't really want to be in a dark alley with.
I know.
Not that I couldn't defend myself, but I just don't want to be in there.
People that are like well-known, popular people, and it's like I get to know them online, and I'm like, oh my god.
You're a person, I see. Okay.
Wow, you're nothing like that in real life, are you?
Yeah, so that's the kind of doing it wrong that I care about.
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly care less about like authenticity, well, except in the way that we mean like being authentic to like your own true self. Right. But like historical, like that is interesting as a nerd. Like I try and footnote stuff because I'm a nerd and I like to know where an idea came from. But I have zero interest in Reconstruction. I don't feel like I need to wear like an Iron Age costume in order to wear magic, or like a medieval costume. Like, I don't know how people decide what period of history they're like, well, I'm going to wear this hat, because even not just in magic, but even in like religious fundamentalism, like I don't know how, you know, Hasidism, Jewish ultra-Orthodoxy, that used to be like a radically progressive movement. And then the radically progressive charismatic leader died, and they were like, I guess we better wear the same kind of hat that he wore forever. What? That's what I think about every time I look at grimoire magicians. Like, I grew up with Amish people, and I know where they buy their reconstructed, like, perfect, historically accurate hat. That's what I think about. I'm like, I don't...
Yeah. Exactly.
Just magical fundamentalism, and I'm not there for it. Yeah, but I do appreciate they do an important service in like just maintaining a tradition. Like they keep things from getting lost, which I appreciate.
Yeah, but the magic is supposed to be like blood and guts, and it's supposed to be
I think so.
it's supposed to be your life, and it's supposed to express who you are.
I agree.
So someone says, if the seals are an approximation, can one create your own?
Yes, absolutely. The course teaches like methods for doing that. In my opinion, like you can definitely create your own.
Well, and there's
Go ahead.
those staves, right? There's like we have the astrological signs that make up the staves that you find on the back of the Solomonic, like the Pentacles on Solomon for the ones that have the names of the spirits. They have the stave patterns that indicate like what signs they're related to according to some texts, right? So I mean, they're like the methods that they were built from. We can.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Like if you understand how they're made, you can make your own. I will say for me, like, I'm not a very competent astrologer. Like, I mean, I'm like a better astrologer than like random people like reading a zodiac in the newspaper, but like not much better than that. Like I'm not an astrologer. So like for me, the sort of understandings I'm really bringing to Solomonic Pentacles are like Hebrew and Jewish phylactery tradition and like Grecophone amulet tradition and Euclidean geometry, which I'm a specialist in, and like those sort of things. And so I think when you understand those, just like I was talking about cooking and recipes, like when you understand the mechanisms, you can absolutely create your own. At a certain point, if you deviate far enough away from the tradition, is what you created still a Solomonic Pentacle? Like, I don't know. I mean, at a certain point, applying the name Solomonic Pentacle to something like becomes a little like calling a hex sign, an Amish hex sign, a Solomonic Pentacle seems like a stretch. But I have definitely made talismans that combine hex signs with Solomonic techniques.
Right. Like eventually you should be making talismans in the Solomonic tradition, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily Solomonic traditions. I mean, it's not necessarily Solomonic Pentacles, but Pentacles in the tradition of...
I would even go further. I would just say that like what it means to make Solomonic Pentacles is to make Pentacles in alliance with Solomon Magician King.
Cool. Alliance with. Yeah. I like that. Neat.
Like that's a person. Like that is a spirit with whom you are working.
Right.
When you meet them.
Yeah. So, all right. Question for you: do you believe in? So we talked about good and evil. Uh-huh. Is the universe fundamentally good or fundamentally evil or fundamentally what?
No, it is not fundamentally either of those things.
Okay.
Like,
based on your magical practice, what's your current theory on how it all works and what it's all about?
Oh, I mean, the world is very complicated. And, okay, I mean, like, that really is it. Like, the world is very complicated. But I will say, like, broadly, I understand invisible nature, by which I mean both, like, sort of non-physical things, but I also mean things that are too small for humans to understand, or too fast, or too slow, or too old, or too big, or too far away, right? All of the things that are outside of my sensory perception, I understand them to function basically the same way that I understand visible nature to work. And so some things I can say about visible nature are that everything is interconnected, that the essential geometry of nature is fractal, that is to say it's self-similar, it's chaotically dynamic, it has fractional Hausdorff dimension, but that's maybe less relevant if you're not a mathematician. Like that like nature, right? That the best way to understand the universe is to understand a tree.
Okay.
And the best way to understand a tree is to understand a forest. And the best way to understand a forest is to understand the phytochemistry of photosynthesis. That like there's this fractalness to nature, and like, but there are patterns and geometries sort of to how it works. And those are the way it works. And I think I would not contextualize any of that as good or evil. Like, I wouldn't know what it would mean to say that a forest was good or a forest was evil. Except to mean, like, it's good to me as a human being, or it's bad for me as the particular being I am.
Yeah, I guess I see what you mean. Nature itself isn't good or evil in its fractal essence. It's just it is what it
Yeah.
is, right? But
Yeah. And I mean, so
so like I'm working on this idea that like God is fundamentally like a little bit broken, and that's why the universe involves things that are a little bit broken sometimes, you know, and that
well,
we're
I mean,
like
that's a
working on
very
fixing it.
Jewish way to understand it, right? That like creation is broken, right? And that our role as humans is that we're called to this ongoing process of co-creation, tikkun olam, of repairing the world, right? That
Mm-hmm.
when holiness comes down, the world shatters. Now, personally, I think broken is like maybe a loaded way to explain that, and I might go with more like unfinished
Unfinished.
or chaotically dynamic,
I like
something like that.
I like a work in progress.
Yeah, exactly. So, I
So
mean, I definitely believe that I am called to leave the world better than I found it. And I think probably other people are too, but I try not to tell other people their business unless I have to.
well, I think we're doing our best at doing that, both of us, and I think we're doing pretty good. I must say, if I do say
Brian?
so myself, I think I've probably screwed up more than you, but
Oh, I
it's
don't know. I
fine.
think maybe I just keep
It's
my screw
fine.
ups quieter.
So somebody asked, and I don't want to get it too into the answer, but you did. Somebody asked what you could tell them about Hecate. So I don't want to get too much into that because I'm sure you could tell us quite a bit about Hecate. But do you have a course or something that you would summarize your teachings on Hecate in?
I don't have a course on Hecate. I might have one coming up at some point. Um, Here's what I mean, I can say a lot about Hecate. There's a lot in Orphic Hymns Grimoire. Like, if somebody wants to read something about what I have to say on that topic, Orphic Hymns Grimoire would be the place to start. Broadly, I understand Hecate's most essential nature as to be a goddess of liminality, right? That's why we find her shrines at like doorways. And so for me personally, like the aspect of Hecate I associate with most strongly is the epithet Crocopeplos, which literally just means like yellow robes. To me, it means like when you look at, like metaphorically, when you look at the moon, behind clouds, it has this like amber glow, right? And so clouds obscure sunlight. But moonlight, when there's clouds, it actually like illuminates a larger area of the sky
Mm-hmm.
than it would otherwise because they refract it. And so I think about Hecate as that kind of like liminality that produces what in education we would call a zone of proximal development.
Oh,
That is to
cool.
say, just like the area where you can learn things, like the potential for growth, right? That exact kind of liminality, that doorway is to me like the face of Hecate that I associate with most strongly, right? That place where you have like liminality and learning and liberation, that doorway. But I think Hecate more broadly is a goddess of liminal places and doorways writ large.
Mm-hmm.
Again.
Yeah, yeah. I was looking at the myth of Zeus and like how like all of his key elements of victory relied on him going to the underworld and releasing the Hecatonchires and the you know getting the underworld the help from the underworld to actually get his assistance, and the only person who has a key to the gates of hell is Hecate, and Hecate is the one he rewards after the defeat of Cronus, you know, and it's like so Hecate is like you know that she's got to be the one that let him even into the Cyclopes, you know, even have access to the Cyclopes and even have access to the hundred handed, you know.
Yeah.
So that relationship with Hecate, I think, is key no matter what approach you have to this whole Greco-Roman whatever tradition that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason like hers is the first Orphic hymn. You know what I mean? Like I think she opens up the gateways of initiation.
Right. Yeah, like Ganesh, like in tantric stuff, you always mention Ganesha first because
Yeah.
he opens a door. Yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody asked, can you work with both Hecate and Solomonic Pentacles?
Well, I do, so
Yeah.
definitely you can.
Nope.
I mean,
Nope.
what I will say
Sorry.
is like,
No, not allowed.
yeah, I mean, like I'm doing it. I mean, you know, again, like Talmud repeatedly complains about the fact that Solomon is working with foreign goddesses, but also like throughout the the sort of Grecophone tradition in late antiquity that we were talking about, like they're all mixed together. So like in Sefer Razim, which is a very Jewish grimoire text, like I would argue perhaps the most Jewish of them, right? It means the Book of Secrets. Like there's a straight up invocation of Helios in the middle of that Jewish text.
Right.
Like, yeah, you definitely can. I'm doing it. Also, like there's a very rich and complicated history of Hellenic Judaism. Like the Hanukkah story is about Hellenic Judaism. Like, yeah, like Hellenic Judaism definitely exists and continues to exist and has existed for thousands of years. And the fact that the rabbis don't approve of it, like they don't approve of magic generally.
Yeah, it's like neighborhood stuff, you know. If you look at them as all being like neighborhoods in the same city,
exactly.
It kind of makes sense, you know, and like, yeah, they don't always get along, but they kind of.
Well, nobody always. I mean, I don't get along with all my neighbors either.
But I mean, you got the same cultural. The sun rises in the same place as it does.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it all blends together. I do a blend of Hellenic, Greco-Roman, Christian, some Hebrew stuff, but only probably as much as you find in the Greek magical papyri. You know,
which is a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just a little bit here and there, you know. But
yeah, same. I would say, like broadly, culturally, like I really think of myself as like I feel really lucky to have grown up with like a lot of intact cultural practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I grew up Jewish and I also grew up Greek. And I understood there to like be a little bit of conflict between those things occasionally, religiously. But culturally, I understood no conflict, especially compared to like the WASPs I grew up with. Jews and Greeks were definitely like all in the same like Mediterranean cultural milieu. But I also grew up in like late 20th century America in that culture. And I also grew up in Amish country, in Pennsylvania Dutch, right? Like I'm not Dutch at all, but I grew up with Dutch people in Dutch culture. I speak some Dutch. So I do like some, you know, Pennsylvania Dutch powwow, it's sometimes called, and bracharai, and that kind of folk magic. Like I just grew up in a lot of different cultures, and that is the norm. Like most people who live in urban environments, not just today, but through oldest antiquity, the nature of an urban environment is that it is complexly multicultural. And so magic that comes out of those urban areas is really always going to be complexly multicultural.
Yeah. Well, you know, speaking of urban areas, I've got somebody is cutting down a tree outside my window. So I think I'm gonna have to call. It's been about an hour. I'm gonna have to go ahead and wrap things up. But I really enjoyed talking to you.
I've had a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we can do this again about like a million other things.
Yes, please.
I have 100 different topics. I would love to talk to you about everything.
Well,
So
I'm enchanted with the sound of my own voice, so I'll come talk to you anytime.
yeah, and I would like to do like more public outreach and stuff with like other people in our community and stuff also.
Absolutely.
You know, because I feel like we should have more conversations like you know the panel discussions you have at conferences, stuff like that, like on a regular basis.
I would love to do that. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I'm just gonna throw out this to other people. Like there is nothing in my mind. There is nothing that will deepen and strengthen your magical practice like co-magicians.
It's true.
Like working magic with other people. So to that end, if you want to come see me and work magic with me in person, my next in-person appearance is at West Virginia Pagan Pride, August 19th. We're gonna do an ancestor veneration ritual.
Very cool. All right. Well, thanks again for hopping on with me, and
thank you so much for having me.
Yep, I look forward to doing it again soon.
Same. Bye.
Bye.